Is prostitution a service in India under GST? Yes, prostitution is considered a service in India, particularly in the context of the Goods and Services Tax (GST) framework, as it involves the provision of a service, sexual services, in exchange for monetary consideration. The Supreme Court of India, in its directive on May 19, 2022, recognized prostitution as a legitimate profession, affirming that sex workers are entitled to fundamental rights and dignity under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. This ruling implies that voluntary and consensual sex work can be treated as a professional service, subject to taxation under applicable laws. Under the GST regime, services are broadly defined to include any activity carried out by one person for another for consideration, unless specifically exempted. Since prostitution is not explicitly exempted under GST laws, it qualifies as a taxable service when conducted voluntarily and professionally. Applicable GST slab for prostitution. The GST rates in India are structured into slabs of 0%, 5%, 12%, 18% and 28%, with some services falling under special rates or exemptions. However, the GST schedule does not explicitly list prostitution or sex work as a distinct service category. In such cases, services not specifically categorized typically fall under the default GST rate of 18% for miscellaneous or unclassified services. As per the GST Council's notifications and the Central Goods and Services Tax (CGST) Act, 2017. Here's the reasoning. The GST rate for services is determined based on the Service Accounting Code (SAC) or the nature of the service. Since prostitution is not assigned a specific SAC, it is likely to be classified under SAC 9997, other services not elsewhere classified, which attracts an 18% GST rate. This aligns with the taxation of other personal or professional services, for example, consultancy, freelance services that are not explicitly listed but fall under the 18% slab. There is no indication in the GST Council's notifications up to the 55th meeting in December 2024 or CBIC guidelines that prostitution is exempt or taxed at a different rate. Additional context. Legal framework. Prostitution itself is not illegal in India, as per the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, 1956. Which allows voluntary sex work in private settings but criminalizes activities like running brothels, public solicitation, or living off the earnings of prostitution. This legal recognition supports the argument that voluntary prostitution can be treated as a taxable service. Taxation in practice. In areas like Sonagachi, Kolkata, the GST regime has been noted to impact the sex trade, with services provided by sex workers potentially generating tax revenue. However, enforcement is inconsistent due to the informal and stigmatized nature of the industry. Exemptions or special cases. Certain services, like healthcare or education, are exempt from GST, but prostitution does not fall under these categories. Additionally, there's no evidence of a special GST rate, for example, 0%, 5%, or 12% being applied to sex work. Conclusion. Prostitution, when conducted voluntarily and as a profession, is considered a taxable service in India under the GST framework. It is most likely subject to the 18% GST rate under SAC 9997 for unclassified services, as no specific exemption or alternative rate is notified for this activity. Now, GST and SGST officials have to issue notices to prostitutes. Also, the income tax officials will be ready to insist for filing the income tax returns by the prostitutes and pay the income tax if their income exceeds Rs 12 lakh per annum.